Hi, it's Wednesday, and that means it's time for another video edition of Widower Wednesday. I'm Abel Keogh, author of the book Dating a Widower, and today we're going to discuss 5 things to avoid asking a widow or widower on a first date. Now, recently I did 5 things to ask a widow or widower on a first date, so today we're going to take the opposite approach. So, ready or not, here we go. The 5 things you should not ask a widow or widower on a first date. The first question not to ask a widow or widower on a first date is, do you still love your late husband or wife? Now, the answer to this question is, of course, yes, they still love their late spouse. But the reason you shouldn't ask it, however, is that love for a late spouse and the ability to love someone new are not mutually exclusive. The human heart has a great capacity for love, and widows and widowers can open their heart and love someone else just as much as they did their late spouse. So instead of asking that question, maybe ask yourself if you want to date someone who will always have a small part of their heart reserved for someone else. The second question not to ask a widow or widower on a first date is, where are you at in the grief process? So here's the truth. Odds are they're probably still grieving. Some have made more progress than others, but grief isn't a linear journey and it doesn't follow a neat timeline, though it would be cool if it did. Besides, asking this question too soon can feel clinical and intrusive, especially on a first date. A better approach is to pay attention on how emotionally present and available he or she is in the moment and not where they rank on some kind of grief chart. And if there are more dates, you'll figure out where they are anyway. You'll just be able to tell by their actions and where they are. So it's, again, not something you have to ask on a first date, but something you'll learn later on. Now, the third question not to ask a widow or widower on a first date is, did you have a good marriage? And to be fair, not every widow or widower had a great first marriage. However, this question can open the floodgates to complicated emotions and whether their marriage was happy, difficult, or somewhere in between. But worst of all, it invites comparison and nostalgia, which isn't fair to either of you and is a mood killer on a first date. So instead of dissecting the past, focus on getting to know him or her now and see where they're at. And you know what? You'll figure out the question about their marriage later, I promise, if there's more dates. Now, the fourth question not to ask a widow or widower on a first date is, what would your late spouse think about you dating again? Now, before they die, most spouses give permission to the surviving spouse to date and be happy again. But the reason you want to avoid this question is that even if it's asked with genuine curiosity, it can trigger guilt, shame, or even hesitation. And it shifts the focus away from healing and puts the dead loved one in the middle of your date, which doesn't sound really great. Now, a widow or widower, they don't need permission from their late spouse or anyone else to move forward. What they need is space to do it in their own way. And again, not a fair question to ask, and you'll figure out the answer the more you date anyway. The fifth question not to ask a widow or widower on a first date is, do you think you'll ever love someone as much as you loved your late husband or wife? Now, each relationship and person is different, and it's not fair to you or the deceased spouse to compare the love for one spouse with someone else. This frames love as some kind of competition, and it's not. A healthy widow or widower can love again, but that love will be different, not better, not worse, just unique to you and the relationship. So respect the fact that both relationships can hold meaning without needing to be compared. It's when the comparison starts that relationships with widows and widowers fall apart. And so that goes for both things. You shouldn't be comparing yourself, and they shouldn't be comparing you. So now those are the 5 things not to ask. Remember that dating a widow or widower means respecting the life he or she had while focusing on the one they're trying to build now. On a first date, your goal isn't to dig in someone's past, but to get a sense of who he or she is today and whether there's a real connection between you. Now, by avoiding emotionally loaded questions about the late spouse, you give a relationship space to grow naturally without pressure, comparison, or guilt. When the widow or widower is ready, they'll open up in their own time, and when they do, it'll mean more because it came from a place of trust, not interrogation. I'm Abel Keogh, author of the book Dating a Widower. If you can think of other questions not to ask a widow or widower on a first date, leave them in the comments below, and I'll see you all next Wednesday.